Hi, welcome to View. This is part of our Updating Professional Practice series. Today we have Diane Davis joining us, who is a Visual Arts Committee member and a longtime volunteer here with us. That it helps with our installations here in the gallery. We're actually in the gallery today, and I'm the exhibition manager here at View and am responsible for doing the installations and curation. So Diane will be leading us, but I will also give in some input on methods of how to frame your piece. So we won't be really looking at artwork, but looking at the back of it tonight. And we'll get started.
Okay, well, I tried to do things in priority and I had a lot of things that I noticed as we hang shows. One of the other volunteers, Lorraine Van Hadden, also contributed some notes to our collection of suggestions. So we're looking at the back because when we're working with things, it's the back is important to us. And so the first thing, I've tried to prioritize things. The first thing about the back of your picture is you need to have some identification on it. This one does not. And the reason for that is kind of obvious, but when we are checking paintings in to get them ready, we will put our own identification on there, but we do it with painter's tape so it sticks and doesn't cause any damage. And those paintings get handled a lot. So they get unpacked, they get stored, they get brought back out for judging, then they get stored again, and then they get brought back out for arranging. They get handled a lot. So if there's no identification on the back, then it's pretty frustrating if that label has to come off. And if it comes off, we can't find it. And sometimes paintings aren't identified on the front either. So we're kind of in a pickle. So it's kind of an obvious thing, but some suggestions. Doesn't have to be fancy. It can be handwritten or typed or your business card. The one thing you don't want to do with your business card is just put a loose business card and tuck it into the frame because those fall out too. And it's also kind of, it doesn't have to, it can be handwritten, just make it legible. Sometimes they're not legible. People at the last minute get a little scrap of paper, stick it on there and write anyway. We have a hard time figuring out who it is. It's also nice, particularly we're in the gallery tonight, that with the CADK show, that is a group of artists, lots and lots of artists. And so if people purchase a painting, it's nice to know a little bit about the artist. So this is one of my paintings, and I just put a few sentences on the back about my work and what I'm doing and my contact information if somebody wants to buy another painting.
And I'll bring that up and show it.
Okay. And the other thing is usually on the requirements, it will say no sawtooth hangers. And this thing that's attached to the back here on this fairly inexpensive frame is a sawtooth hanger. And they'll have them both directions. These are designed to hang on a nail. And so that if it gets bumped even a little bit, it'll bounce right off of the nail. Sometimes they actually fold out and can damage the wall. So we don't want that either. And we hang these on a regular picture hanging hook. And so it's really hard to get that to work. So we require that these be ready to hang by a wire instead. And that works a lot better. In fact, in some galleries, if it is not wired for hanging, they won't hang it at all, because it is not the gallery's responsibility to get that wire on there and do it correctly.
That becomes very time consuming. A lot of the shows have a very quick turnover. So if someone has delivered it like this, it might end up just not going in because we don't have the time to fix a frame or don't want to be responsible for possibly going through the frame too much or something happening when you're putting these hooks on. And these,
well, that was in a minute.
oh, yep.
All right, so then the other thing is the kind of wire that you use. And we have people submit work with all kinds of wire, but the best wire to use is regular picture hanging wire, which is a twisted wire. It comes in different weights, 10, 20, 50, 100 pound, and it gets thicker and less flexible as it gets thicker. So that's all kind of up to you, judge the weight of your picture. But one of the things that we often see for people that frame things themselves, if you're getting something framed at a framing studio, they do it correctly. But if you're doing it yourself, you want to make sure when you put this wire through that you do it twice. And you just kind of thread it through, and then you twist it together and make sure you get some good twists on it. This standard procedure, then at the end of that, to put a piece of tape on it, just to protect it. I don't always do that. Sometimes I just clamp it so there's none of those little tiny wires hanging out, and that works okay. So that, that's kind of up to you. But the important thing is to get this on here. I've helped hang shows a few times where I would hang a piece on the wall and just go to stabilize it on the hook, and it would fall to the floor because the wire had come undone. So it was bad.
It can also mess with the measurements and the hanging of the show if it starts to slip over time, because it will start to drop below the eye level, and it will suddenly you go in the gallery,
it'll slide
and look and be like, man, that seems low. I don't think we messed up that much.
right. And so we find too that some of those other kind of wires, depending on how you've attached it, it just gradually keeps sagging and sagging. The other thing is the hook that you attach it with. Now, in days past, this is kind of an old-fashioned, and you're going to take all of these, right?
Thank you.
Kelsey is going to fix it so you can see up close. So we would hang it with what basically was an eye hook like that. And the problem with these is that sometimes if you don't put them in exactly straight or exactly in the middle, or the painting's pretty heavy, these little paintings are pretty light, so it's not a big issue, but that hook can actually pull out and again, fall to the floor. So what's better, we think, is a D hook. And these are screwed in with a little more substantial screw and a little flip hook like this. And they come in different sizes. And my paintings are kind of small. So I looked and looked. When you go to the Lowe's or wherever you go to buy your framing supplies, they usually have these larger D hooks. But I finally found some little D hooks and looked in all the catalogs and ended up buying them in a box of 100 from Walmart. So I ordered those online. So I like those. They sit nice and flush, and the screw is a little more secure. All right, the other thing is when you put that wire on, and we see this all the time, make sure that it is at least an inch, this top of the wire thing, that this space right here is at least an inch. It's better to have it 2 or 3 inches. If it is close to the top, then when we hang it on the wall, this hook shows. And so then we have to take the wire off and kind of shorten it, and we shouldn't have to be doing that. You don't want that hook to show because it gets stretched like this.
Which that does happen. It happened twice in this last show that.
Yeah. So we have to,
Yeah.
and we really don't like to mess with what the artists have, how they've done their work on the back, but we do correct that when it happens.
I highly suggest once you've finished your painting or framed your photo, if you've done it yourself, do a test hang it on the wall and see how it looks, see how it sits off the wall. See if the actual hanging wire is correctly equal, because on the back here, if you do not have this side level with this, it can cause some wonkiness and not able to hang level. So you always want to measure and make sure you have that equidistant.
All right, this distance here should be, according to my framing specialist, should be about 1/3 of the distance. And for me, I usually measure this very precisely because sometimes I hang it on the wall in my home on the hook instead of the wire. So I have 2 hooks in the wall so that it always hangs level if it gets bumped, like in a hallway or something. The other thing is the glass or the plexiglass that you put in a frame. make sure it should be about 1/8 inch, should be a pretty tight fit in there. If you go much more, if you make it much smaller than that, it'll actually pop out of the frame. And that's particularly true for metal frames. And so we see that happen all the time, particularly if it's a thin piece of plexiglass. If it's just not tight enough in there, it'll actually pop right out. And you should also, thinking about metal frames, this one is not, let me get the other one. If you're using metal frames, they work fine, but you want to make sure that if you've done these, that there's a little spring clip that goes in this space right here. And so you just kind of squish it down. Our lights just went out. You squish it down and you can kind of slide it into that space. I use a little flathead screwdriver and push it in. Now on this one, they're really not close enough together. And you should allow maybe 3 inches between each one of these, and that will hold everything in pretty tight. Another way to do these metal frames.
And I'll just show what this spring looks like.
Yeah, if you use metal frames, you probably know what those are.
Yeah.
The other thing, this is also a metal frame. And I didn't use the little spring clips at all. I put enough I put enough backing board and foam core and whatever I needed in there to actually fill up that space. And that works okay too. And I kind of prefer that sometimes, yeah.
And of course, you be careful with that method, because if it's glass in the front and you're trying to squeeze too thick a foam board in,
That's right.
it just cracks the glass.
Right. Well, then same with the springs too. You have to be a little bit careful. So the next thing is carrying the frames. So you want to always be careful, especially on these metal frames, that you either carry it by the wire or the sides. And if you carry it like this, particularly if it's a big thing and a big metal frame, this can also cause the glass or plexiglass to pop out. If the glass pops out, it'll often chip in the corners, and that's another.
Yeah. And you can also just warp the frame at the top if you're carrying it like that, and it won't sit even.
So what else? Let's see. The another good thing is to think about how you carry, how you store your picture frames. One of the things to remember is when you're carrying them or storing them, leaning them against the wall like I do at home, is that you don't do them front to back. And we've had people ship their paintings in this way, and this painting is fine, but this one on the bottom is damaged because of the hooks and hardware and things on the other painting. So when you're carrying them, it should always be front to front and back to back. So you kind of alternate it that way, and you'll have less damage. And so be careful with that. I'm always surprised. I was surprised in unpacking last time that we had some very elegant pieces that were packed so that one damaged the other.
And another thing to be mindful of is with those hooks, if you are setting, so always go back to front, but if you did set it up there, you can actually crack the glass as well with that hook hitting the glass, or scratch it. Did you want to cover the covers, go over those as well? For storage?
Oh, sure. Well, people come up with a variety of ways of carrying their paintings, and I tend to work in a similar size all the time. So I created these little envelopes, and I stole this idea. And the person I stole it from said that was okay. She stole it too. So, but it's an insulation bubble kind of stuff. So it's a lot more rigid than normal bubble wrap. And so with just a little bit of duct tape on the sides, it's very sturdy. And you can put these in a bag and carry them. And so they work pretty well. Of course, they're a little bit of an investment, but they can be used over and over and over again. So I really like them. Also on the framing, we're going to talk a little bit about repurposing frames. We all repurpose frames. But this is kind of a finished frame, and this was actually done in a framing shop. But sometimes they'll put a bumper right here, and you can buy these. They're little bumper things. And what that does is not only protect the wall, because some of those metal frames have very sharp, scratchy edges, but it kind of, when it sits against the wall, keeps it from scooting a little bit back and forth. So that's a nice touch. If you're doing a canvas frame, then that's a little different story. And so that kind of depends on how thick the canvas is. This happens to be a board, and what the depth of the frame is. So you buy these little offset hooks, and they kind of screw into the frame and just hold this part in. So they might actually be raised. If this was on stretcher bars, it might be a little higher. So you would buy a different kind of hook. This one does not have enough. It should have 2 here and 3 across here. So that's another consideration. And it helps with warping and just makes it more stable.
And Diane, did you want to talk about these a bit too? These, yeah.
Oh, sure. Well, this one show it. Let me see if I have one that shows a little. Well, this is black and black. So there are these little flat points that go in here, and you buy some of these inexpensive frames. You can kind of fold these up and put it back in there. But if you invest in a brad driver, a framing brad, for frames in particular, I didn't bring one with me, but they're these little flat pointy things, and you just press it down in there and it will hold it in. Now, I don't like to have this show.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to demonstrate how to not have that show. So let's talk about frame quality a little bit. And with frame quality, there are lots of really inexpensive frames. Framing is expensive in general, but these days there are lots of really inexpensive frames, and I buy some myself now and then. And I've noticed that I've helped hang a couple of shows lately, just friendly shows at a library or something. And the frame will be like a dollar store frame, just a real plasticky kind of thing. And a very expensive price on the painting, like $500. And somehow I feel like, the frame needs to be nice too. If the painting is nice, the frame should be as nice as you can manage. That's just my preference. But we all like to repurpose frames, use them over and over again. And so I have people buy frames at garage sales and frames. I take things out, cannibalize the frames, take them in and out and put them back in. But for me, I don't like to see all this stuff back here. So what I will do is I've titled this Repurposed Frames and Messy Backs.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't like to have this messy back. So I put a dust cover over it. And dust cover is just simply a piece of paper. And looks like this when it's all done. Or sometimes the paper, as far as the paper goes, it's basically just a brown craft paper.
And when Diane's getting that next one, I just wanted to mention the frame quality is important. If you're in a juried show and there's going to be awards, if it comes down to you and another person, it might come down to who picked the best frame for that photo or for that painting. So it is considered at times. I've been on different jury panels, and I've also helped the selection for different shows, and it can sometimes matter because the judge will think, well, did they consider this? Did they think about it, how it went, and how it is as a whole?
And when you were talking in that photography workshop, and it's not something when Travis did that, we were talking about that you also include the photograph of the picture in the frame. Mm-hmm. And I don't normally do that. I normally just put the image itself. So the frame is part of your presentation. So think about that a little bit. And if you've repurposed a frame, make it look as nice as possible. Clean it up,
Mhm.
You know, maybe wax it a little bit or just kind of touch up any spots and you know, make it look nice, especially the back. Some of the paper, like this is archival paper in the back, and it's much more expensive, and I decided it wasn't really necessary because you've got backing paper behind your, if on a watercolor painting, backing paper behind there, maybe foam core. So there's a lot of stuff going on between this piece of paper and the rest of the picture. So I just buy a nice craft paper. I have been known to cut up a brown paper bag and do the same thing.
And also, if anyone has questions as we're going along here, please feel free to pop them into the chat and we'll answer them as we go.
And so in the old days, when I would put the dust cover on, it would be done with glue. But that's not the way the framers do it these days. And so double face tape is your friend. This comes in two versions. This is, you want the permanent version. There is a removable version that's not quite as sturdy. And so I just take the tape and go all the way around and attach it. And I do it in shorter because if you roll out too much of this, it's a sticky mess. And you can overlap it. So you don't have to be that fussy, but to bring it right up to the edge. And then I cut a piece of this paper. And this is not very heavy. And you want it to be just a little bit smaller than your frame. And so you're going to kind of just stretch it out at the corners. Gets a little more interesting if you have a big picture. And you press it down. Now, this is probably good enough, but I like it to be stretched. And so I kind of like the magic of that, but make sure you press this down real well. And then you take a damp sponge and you just kind of go over the whole thing. And you just want to dampen the paper.
And what's that doing, Diane?
Well, what happens is the paper will sag like it's doing now, and it will stretch. When it dries, it shrinks, and this will be nice and tight. So it's just kind of fun to come back and have it all pretty.
Yeah.
And then the advantage of using the tape as opposed to glue is that when you go to repurpose this frame again, it's pretty easy to pick up that tape and peel it off and start over. And it will last a long time. I have things that I've framed a long time ago, and it holds very well. And that really cleans up the back. It's pretty easy to do. So I'll set that aside.
Someone just asked if it's permanent or if they can remove it. So you've
Yeah,
answered.
it does. You can
Yeah.
just get your fingernail under it. You can get it off. Yeah, it'll peel off. Although I did buy some inexpensive frames lately that must have a coated thing on it. And I noticed it was taking off some of the coating. So just check that. This one will be fine. And some other things, just as in addition to that, since this is not really about matting and things in general, it's really about the back of the frame. You know, you can think about the width of your mats, and all of that stuff is really just an artistic decision. Framers have preferences, you know, an even space, 2 to 3 inches around the outside. I like a weighted thing. I don't always do it. A weighted mat just simply means that. All right. Well, maybe I want to show you. Oh, this is a weighted mat. And this is too much. This is exaggerated, but a weighted mat will just be a little bigger on the bottom. And it's kind of an optical illusion when it's even. Sometimes the little bottom part will look smaller, even though the space is exactly even. So that's why the framers sometimes will do a weight, they call it a weighted mat, just a little bit bigger, not exaggerated like this. That's because I was repurposing the frame and I hadn't thought about the frame before I did this wonky painting.
That happens a lot in printmaking as well, the weighted bottom. And it also can help to add a signature on if you wanted to sign on.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. And did I talk about cleaning the glass? Did I miss that?
Not yet.
Okay. And the other thing is when you have your glass on your painting, you can clean regular glass with any old window cleaner, but Plexiglass does not like ammonia. So if you're using Windex or some product that has ammonia in it, it will cause your plexiglass to get cloudy. So just be aware of that and get a glass cleaner that's appropriate for plastic. There's also other kinds of glass you can get. You probably all know about that already, but regular glass, conservation glass, non-glare glass, which gets kind of, I don't like non-glare glass, but
It's also very
then a
expensive.
very expensive conservation glass is very expensive. And a lot of shows require plexiglass these days. So it's kind of your option and what you can afford. Whoop, there goes the lights again. And Kelsey, I think that's about. Is that about it?
Yeah,
What
we
else do you want to
have
address?
we have a couple questions,
All
so
right.
we'll answer those. So one of them is, how do you decide where and how to sign your paintings?
Oh, well, I don't know that there's any rule for that, really. I always do it on the left side. Most people do it on the right side. I do it on the left side because I'm afraid I'll run out of space. So I do it on the right side. So if I start on the left side, it doesn't matter. But I think that's just up to the artist. It is nice if it's signed on the front, because if we lose the label on the back, we can find it.
Yeah, just the rule of thumb, sign both sides or write your name on the back side.
We had that happen where there was nothing on the
Yeah.
back. So,
And then it's a mystery when you have a gallery full of 100 paintings or so, and then it's like, well, which one
Yeah.
is this?
and I think the protocol is a little different for photographs, because I know I'm looking now, I can see one now that is not matted, it's mounted flat on a frame like a metal. Some of the photographs now are coming on these aluminum sheets. And so they don't seem to sign them on the front. So that kind of changes depending on the medium you're using.
And
So,
someone actually did ask a question similar to that. They said they were fiber artists and were informed that their unframed wrapped art submission must be in a 1.5 inch deep canvas or board. And they just said they don't know what that is and if we could help, which I believe it means that it needs to have a border that's deep on it.
like a frame.
Yeah, that's the only thing I can think of. Here's the message.
I can't see it from here. Just read it again.
I'm a fiber artist and was informed with this unframed wrapped art submission must be 1.5 deep on canvas or board.
So, but I think it just means it needs to be mounted
Yeah,
and not deeper than 1.5 inches. Is that what it sounds like
yeah, it must be so that it has a hanging mechanism
on the back?
on the back, so it's not, because sometimes I've worked at places where you get artwork in and people haven't thought about the hanging mechanism. So if you're working with pieces that are outside of the normal framing, that's part of making the art piece, is knowing how you're going to install it. In my own art practice, I work with glass, which is heavy, so I can't use these hooks. They're not sturdy enough. So I have to kind of have forethought of how is this going to be hung without seeing the hanger, or is the hanger intentional to see? So a common method I use is French cleats, which is 2 different angles that are slotted. There's one on the wall that's at an angle, and then there's one that's on the piece at an angle, and it slots down. A lot of heavier paintings will be like this.
Yeah, I've bought those sets of cleats like at Lowe's or Home Depot, particularly for sometimes they call them mirror hangers. And so so when you're ready, once you get it mounted on the wall on the back of the piece, then you just kind of lift it up and it just sits down in there. They're very nice,
Yeah,
but it does take a little more fussing about to get them on. Yeah.
but yeah, as a rule of thumb, never send your work to a gallery without some type of
Right. Well,
hanger.
and when we had that happen this year, we had a couple of pieces come in with no good way of hanging them. And so we sent them back. We just didn't, it wasn't, it just wasn't our responsibility to take that on. That was really the artist's obligation to make sure that we could hang it. We actually like to get fabric things because they don't break.
Yeah.
So it's okay. But yeah, the fabric things usually the artist will do some kind of little hanger thing on the back or a piece of wood to keep it straight, like for quilts and things like that.
And a couple other questions. Is plexiglass difficult to work with? Does it scratch easily? It doesn't scratch any more than glass, I would say.
I think it's a little easier to scratch than
Okay.
glass, but
I'm super careful because I work
Yeah.
with glass, so I'm always like very on edge every time I have it. So don't scratch it up.
and you can, cut your own plexiglass, but it's tricky. There's a technique to cutting plexiglass, and then there's, that's just part of however you decide to frame it. A lot of artists take their work to framers, but it's very expensive that way. And I don't do it very often unless it's just a big piece. And so I do my own framing too, my own mat cutting as well. But there's so many more things you can do now that are available online. You can order all these mats, you can order them custom cut, so that's all up to you. And yes.
Another plexiglass question was, can we recommend a cleaner for plexiglass? I don't use it often, so I'll leave that question.
I don't know. Method, I think, is good for plexiglass. Read the label. Just anything, I think really anything that doesn't use ammonia is what you want to use. And but I think Method's okay. I've used that. I keep some of that around.
But ammonia-based products for glass is very good.
Yes.
So it's just pay attention.
Yeah, pay attention. There are some glass cleaners now that, say, oh, no ammonia, and they're wonderful for the glass, but they're not as good as ammonia. but they're fine probably for most of the things that certainly for that I do, the smaller things.
Let me just read a couple.
Got a lot of questions.
Yes, they came in hot here. Someone said, I see you included a small bio on the back of the art. Do you ever include a certificate of authenticity with an art piece?
Well, what does that mean? That you actually did it? That it's original?
Yeah, I guess that would be it. But putting your bio and signing it is doing that.
Is it? Okay,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't quite know that.
I mean, I guess that would, if I was a big important artist, maybe there would be some benefit to doing that, but yeah, I'm not sure I understand what they're asking.
And then someone asked about Velcro my piece on top.
To hang it on the wall?
Yeah, I would worry about it falling.
Well, those command hooks come with a Velcro version, and they're wonderful. And I use them. I haven't used them for hanging artwork, but I've used them for hanging other things. And it depends on the surface that it's on. But after a year and a half or so, it let loose. So it depends.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those command strips come with a sticky side, and then like a Velcro thing in between. But
they worry me a bit, just that they could fall. So
yeah, I would worry about them a little bit.
Somebody asked if there's different thicknesses of plexiglass because they've had bends. There is different thicknesses.
Oh, yes. Yeah, they've definitely different thicknesses. And if you go to a place like Michael's and get a frame that's all got the mat and got everything in it and it's got the plexiglass, it's going to be pretty thin plexiglass. And you can just buy it at the hardware store and have it cut.
Yep, and Lowe's. Yep.
There are places online where you can order it. I do a lot of paintings at 11 by 14, where I'll just order a bundle of a dozen. It's expensive, but I use it and then repurpose all these frames, so it lasts a long time. And but yeah, I prefer the thicker, and we've got some pieces here that are the thinner kind, and so it kind of bulges, gets in that frame, and then when you're looking at it sideways, it's kind of bulging. But.
And you can also get glass cut at Lowe's,
Right.
too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, so, but a lot of shows prefer plexiglass for the obvious reason, so they're not handling and worrying
Yeah.
about breakage. We don't necessarily do that here. We take it either way, but those ones with glass, especially the big ones, are really heavy. So that's a consideration. Make sure you use the heavy wire
Yep.
if you do that.
And you can weigh things, if you don't have like one of those scales for shipping, you can weigh yourself and then hold the painting too. That kind of works if it's a heavier painting.
Right, right.
And then someone also asked about the canvas wrapped, like when it's just,
Oh,
if you should use a dust cover or how you should display that.
well, I would say that would be preference on how nice it looks on the back. If it looks nice and new, and I would just go ahead and put the D-rings on it and the wire. I don't think you necessarily would, I don't think we get them usually with dust covers. We do get
Mhm.
oil paintings and things that do have dust covers covering the whole back and the frame, but not always. Normally, I think of the dust covers on paintings that have been matted and are more the watercolor kind that have been matted behind glass. And but the dust I was looking around before, and some of these oil paintings things have dust covers on them too. Same procedure, but some of them actually are a little more three-dimensional.
Yeah. One thing I will say about the stretch canvas, particularly if you're sending it off and getting it printed online, make sure when you receive it, it's stretched all the way. Because sometimes you see work that's like floppy, and that distracts you from actually appreciating the work.
No, I've never done that. Do they come with stretcher bar keys? The things you like to
I think it
tack in?
matters on how much you're paying and where
Oh,
you're
yeah,
getting it.
right.
Yeah.
But people that paint on stretch canvas, there's usually a little triangular piece of wood called a stretcher bar key, and it taps into the corners and it'll kind of tighten it up a little bit.
Yeah. And then just to wrap up, I wanted to say we do have 2 more updating your professional practice left. Next week will be writing statements. I will be leading that, just talking about formatting, kind of the do's and don'ts. And also we'll just go over some of my own statements. I might get some from other artists and read out examples of good ones and bad ones. They're very important to an artist practice. Because people sometimes might not understand what's going on in your work. So that will be next week. And then the week after that will be packing and shipping with Susan Cox, who is a glass artist. We're both glass artists, so we definitely know how to ship things, most fragile work, but a lot of you out there that are painters or photographers are probably shipping glass too. But we'll talk about framed work to sculptural work to how you make sure somebody knows how to unbox it. We'll go through quite a bit. So make sure you tune in for that too. Thank you so much for being here,
Thank
Diane.
you.
And thank you for coming and joining us tonight. Thank you. Oh, goodness.